And we're still recording, Dana?
Yeah, yeah. I'll just turn my video off for a second so everyone's not watching me look hard at the settings.
Okay, I think we're going to get going. All right, everybody, we are going to get going on this webinar. If you can mute your line, I think everyone's done this a few times already in their life. So we'll get going here. Really excited to chat with you guys today about this topic. And it's going to be kind of a really fun kind of critical thinking discussion. And so we're excited to have Scott and Dana join us on it. So without further ado, just as we talked about a second ago, housekeeping, just mute your line. Right now we have the Q&A open. We're trying to figure out what's going on with the chat. So enter questions into that. We will be recording this and we'll have a recording available at the end. And then we're hoping to get into some insight exchange via the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Okay. So just some speaker bios here. I will go last and I'll talk about Scott first. So we're really excited to have Scott Sainert here with us. He is the Director of Sport Performance and a sport dietitian for the Dallas Cowboys. He's been with the team for 8 seasons now, which is an eternity in the NFL. And he specifically works closely with athletic trainers and strength and conditioning coaches to develop player-specific nutrition and recovery plans. Prior to Dallas, he spent 7 years as the sport dietitian at Auburn, where he oversaw nutrition needs of athletes over 21 sports, and then also with Michigan State University, interning with USA Speed Skating as well. Scott's really educated. He's got a Bachelor of Dietetics from Ball State and then 2 master's degrees, one in nutritional sciences from University of Kentucky and 1 master's in kinesiology with a concentration in ex-phys from Michigan State. Dr. Dana Liss, for those of you who don't know, is also co-founder of Performance Nutrition Professionals, the group today that's hosting this webinar. She's currently the sport dietitian for Golden State Warriors and is also a research affiliate at the UC Davis in the Department of Neurobiology, Physiology, and Behavior. Dana has been a nutrition consultant and dietitian across a variety of sports over her 15-year career, and these have included multiple amounts of teams, women's and men's pro cycling, internationally, MLS soccer, Olympic sports in both Canada, US, and in Russia. And she's also been an expert advisor for a variety of companies in kind of an industry and R&D role, and those include SIS, Vital Proteins, Brains Bio, and as well as Dana and I have both been involved in kind of mentorship and development of the profession in Canada. She kind of ran a program up there that was called the B210 Sport Nutrition Mentorship Program. Dana attained her bachelor and a degree and her registered dietitian training in Canada at University of British Columbia. Her PhD was at the University of Tasmania and postdoc at UC Davis in California. And her research areas have looked at investigating the FODMAPs diet in athletes and gastrointestinal health, and as well as looking at the effects of gelatin and vitamin C in collagen synthesis in the body and in performance. Dana is an accomplished researcher with over 14 peer-reviewed publications and has been granted over $750,000 in research funding through her research endeavors. So we're excited to have her on the call today. And then for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jen Gibson. I'm currently the head performance dietitian for the Chicago Blackhawks, as well as the Colorado Rapids MLS. Prior to this, I spent 7 years as a sport dietitian and sports science coordinator for the Chicago Bears. And then before that, spent 10 years in Olympic sports between Team Canada and Team USA. I've also a sport nutrition lecturer with University of Colorado Springs. And my undergrad was at Ryerson University in Canada. My master's in exercise science was at University of Victoria in Canada as well. So we are here to talk about a really fun topic, looking at ways to expand our scope of practice. And so I'll kind of review the various scopes of practice that we tend to kind of find ourselves working in. And we'll talk about kind of how we work at a baseline level and how we can kind of go deeper into each of these areas. And then we'll have Scott jump in and just discuss his own unique and personal journey from kind of moving out of the collegiate space, which a lot of dietitians work in right now. Probably the majority of our profession in the US is probably based in a collegiate setting, and how he's gone into the pro setting. And then we'll have Dr. Dana List talk a little bit about her really unique journey through being a practitioner and then becoming a scientist, and really how she kind of bridges those two worlds together in her current practice. So sorry about that. So why did we create this really interesting webinar and this web workshop? And I kind of put up a funny question there, because Dana and I have just over our career, and I know Scott's probably can concur with this too, we've had countless interns and young RDs kind of coming up through the sport nutrition education system in the States. And they are just like working usually in their first positions in kind of more of a nutrition logistics role. And this is just a picture of my one of my former interns doing our weekly dry prep for smoothies, and kind of, you know, asking the question to us, like, is this all there is? Like, is this it? I'm bored. You know, they kind of get into the level, this level of practice. And even if they're working for some grandiose NFL or NHL or professional team or a huge college team, their day-to-day job is very logistics focused, and they kind of can't see their way out of that role and where they can kind of expand. And so this was kind of the idea, the genesis of this conversation that we wanted to have, because through the three of us, and we probably have close to 60 years of experience if you add up all of our years, we tend to be senior tenured people here. We've all gone pretty deep and kind of had really interesting careers. And so we kind of wanted to talk about some of the practice areas and really to challenge you to critically think through those things and ways that you kind of deepen your practice, so that yes, there's more to our professional field than dry prepping and giving out smoothies. And so just to kind of start, I wanted to take this theme for everybody on the call, that there's these three musts for expanding your professional scope. You know, you might say to yourself, well, I really want to get into this area and I want to become the expert in it and I want to do it. And I'll kind of weave this theme into every area we speak to. You have to have these foundations. The first thing you have to be, if you want to start expanding your scope into a new area of practice, is you have to be knowledgeable in the area. And when I say that, especially if you're a young practitioner, whatever you learned in your undergrad by taking the one class, or maybe you kind of read one paper on it, that doesn't count. You have to say, okay, I'm going to be expanding my scope into this area. I need to understand really what it's all about. And so you have to go deep and start to learn and really start to acquire a really robust knowledge of that practice area. The second thing you want to do is, as you start to want to expand your scope of practice, is you have to be respected within your peer group of the people that you're going to be moving into that with. So that respect is something that's kind of a soft skill, but also hard skill, in that you're the knowledge keeper of that, you know? So if you're really knowledgeable about it, that lends itself to being respected in that area as well. And then that's also kind of a professional, the way you conduct yourself professionally, the way you interact with your peers, the way you kind of weave yourself into the team, that respect needs to be there. So you need to be respected as an expert in this area. And I think as you start to move your scope, really, really circling back to the impact that you want to have by expanding it. So it has to be an impactful contribution to the team in terms of health and performance. And especially if you're trying to advocate for yourself to kind of get into a new area, understanding the impact that's going to have on the health and performance of your athlete helps you to answer the question as to why. Why do you need to get involved in blood work? Why do you need to be involved in this? Knowing the impact helps to also provide rationale for that. So as we kind of talk through these areas, you'll see this little graphic, and I want you to think through those three areas, because it's not just like I want to learn GPS and I'm going to do it. You have to understand the knowledge in the area. You have to become a respected professional in that task, and then you have to also try to advocate for why it's impactful. So this just kind of summarizes the areas of performance nutrition practice that as a team practitioner, you may find yourself in. So we'll kind of walk through these one by one together. And then as a team, Dana and Scott will address some, but for the most part, you're kind of in all the boxes, usually as a team practitioner, sport dietitian, maybe outside of the yellow box. And that's going to be Dana's kind of bread and butter to talk about. But what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about each of these areas together as a group, talk about a baseline level of practice, and then talk about ways that we can get expanded scope. So again, you kind of come out, you might be working in a team environment, you might be working in a collegiate environment, and one of your tasks that you might be dealing with on a daily basis is nutrition logistics. So you may be in charge of a fueling station. Your job may be to stock them with the drinks, bars, and products, do reordering. You might be making smoothies. You might be handing out supplements or using those fun tackle boxes to do that. You might be ordering and doing inventory management. You might have a little bit of like ad hoc education that you do kind of at a fueling station. And then I joke around and say, you might be posting social medias of all the foods and snacks that you give out. Oh, look at what we have at our fueling station. Check it out. And so a lot of times, a lot of kind of RDs starting out, or if they're working in a really, really busy environment, this is kind of where they're living. They're living in nutrition logistics, and everything that's on the slide that I described ends up kind of being their day-to-day. And if that's your current scope, great. There's opportunity to expand. And so let's talk a little bit about, you're in this environment. This is your day-to-day job. You don't see kind of a way out or a way to progress out of this. Let's talk about ways that you can expand your scope if you're stuck in a 80% logistics role. So, and this is something I used to challenge my interns that were running our fueling station to think through. So do you actually know? These are just questions to think about. And if you're sitting on the call right now, I want you to really internalize this and think about it and maybe just check one off. Maybe this is something where you can go, yeah, I'm not doing this. And this can be something you can start as a worksheet in front of you to say, how can I expand my scope in this area? So when I ask these questions, I want you to think about it. Do you know the scientific rationale and the references for every single item that you're dispensing out of that fuel station? And it's amazing to me, sometimes we have RDs that are just giving out cherry juice, giving out collagen, giving out beet shots, giving out black currant supplements, giving out alanine, and they actually don't know that. They don't know the scientific rationale, and they don't actually know where any of the research comes behind those products. That's a really important piece for you to learn as a practitioner and to kind of increase your depth of knowledge in those areas. So that's for you, or something to think about. Just to add to that, do you actually know the therapeutic dosing protocol for each of these items? I've seen practitioners give out sprinkles of collagen or beets ad libitum, and that's not the way the dosing protocols work for these things. Having a little bit of creatine once a week is not actually how the supplement should be used. And so understanding what the actual therapy dosing protocols are can help to kind of maybe enlighten how you're dispensing these items in a more meaningful way from your fueling station. Kombucha on tap does not qualify as giving your athletes a really effective dose of probiotics. So, kind of thinking through those things a little bit from a therapeutic dosing protocol perspective. What are the current inefficiencies to what you're offering? Are there inefficiencies to what you're offering? And the question is again, are we ordering too much? I remember working with a dietitian who, at their fueling station, it was like, we have to have every single flavor of every single Cliff Bar needs to have every single flavor of that. And then the ones that people don't like are expiring before they have a chance to use it. So you're wasting $5,000 a year in this Cliff Bar order because it's not being consumed. So you as a fuel station person, instead of just doing what you're told all the time and just operating like a robot, what are inefficiencies in your system? Maybe it's something like that, but think about how the operation is working and ways to improve. Staying ahead of the research about potential new products is also a whole other way to expand your scope in this area. So what's coming down the pipe? What's coming out of other sports? What are your athletes talking about? Doing research to look at what should we be bringing in and what's the research behind it can be something to engage in. And then a really big thing to think about is, how can you formalize your athlete and staff education to understand what you're doing there? Do they actually understand why you have these products? Are they having a learning impact from what you're doing at the fueling station. You can create a whole bunch of activities around learning and seeing if there's retention there as well. So food service provision is our next little area. Baseline cafeteria, and you may have no involvement in this department at all. You might be involved in reviewing menus or offering changes. You might be doing meal attendance or meal checks as people are coming through. You might be doing hotel food ordering for away, pre or post game catering. You might be setting up athletes with personal chefs or meal preps, or you might be doing some sort of budget management. That's kind of something we're all looking at. And again, for some people, food service provision is actually, 99% of what they do. They're just basically doing food service prep. And what I'd like to have here is just a reminder to you, before you kind of poo-poo, working in food service, is that athletes often eat, especially in the collegiate and pro environment,
What happened? I can hear you. You're muted.
All right. Jen just disappeared for some reason. All right. Let me pick that back up here. I'm gonna pick up right where she left off. That's why we're a team. Well, that was weird.
Are we still on the Zoom? Is everybody still
Yeah,
here?
we should still be on the Zoom. Let me just bring it up here. Yep, we should still be on the Zoom. And
Okay.
I still have 100 participants on. Well, that was really weird, everyone. I'm really sorry. Can somebody just give me a quick thumbs up, either in the chat or the Q&A, just to let us know that we're good. Jen was cut off. Okay, but you guys can still hear me? All right, we're still here. We're still live. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again and just pick up right where Jen left off. All right, so let me just flip through. Okay, so what I'm going to do is pick up right at the sort of the clinical and the biomarker piece. And this is where I think often when we're starting off working with teams and in sports, sorry, that's probably Jen calling me. Hey, we're just picking up. Can you log back in? Yeah, I don't know why. Just log back in. It's fine. I'm just picking up where you left off. No problems. No problems. Okay, bye. Okay. It was Jen, obviously. I might have to cut that off of the recording. Okay, so I'll just chat about the biomarker piece a bit, and then when Jen jumps back on, oh, she's back on. Perfect. All right, Jen, you're back on. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing, Jen, and you can go back to sharing, okay?
Okay. Maybe you should share.
I can share, that's no problem.
Yeah, maybe that's part of the problem. I don't know.
Okay.
Where did I stop yapping? Food service provision here?
I think right here. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, everybody. Sorry about that. So what I was saying was you might have no involvement in this department at all. And you might just, or you just might be involved in doing some menu changes or meal attendance. You might be doing some food service logistics in terms of like pre and post game catering, some chefs, and maybe some budget management. So the baseline kind of involvement is really variable. I do know some RDs that just don't want to be involved in cafeteria at all. They're like, they do their own thing. It's its own company. I just manage the fuel station. We can click, go ahead. And so the reminder I have for you guys for this area is 75% of what the athletes are oftentimes eating, especially in a pro environment or maybe even collegiate environment, is going to be coming from the cafeteria. So if you're not involved in the provision and oversight of this, you're missing out on basically how the athletes are fueling themselves. They're only fueling themselves with your fueling station for like 10% of their calories. This is kind of where the bulk of it is coming from. In a pro environment, sometimes, and a collegiate, like the amount of money that they're spending in this food service operation is tremendous. It's the same as a backup quarterback. in terms of organizational spend, millions of dollars. So we really want to be prioritizing this in terms of being in front of it and being an active participant in something that's such a huge financial impact as well on our organization. You can click. So when we're expanding our scope into this area, I really encourage you to lean into food service. It can be a huge opportunity for you to expand your scope, especially if it's not something you're kind of like, I don't know if I love this. But, how are you building your buffet line items? Are you relating those to performance nutrition principles? Is there a rationale for them? Are you starting to layer different thoughts and different approaches with that? Or is that an opportunity for you as well? And then when your athletes, can you honestly say when your athletes are walking into that cafeteria, do you feel like they have an educated strategy to feeding in there? Do they know how to feed for certain days, certain training days? Do they know how to feed for certain meals as they are respective to when their training is occurring that day? Do they actually have an approach outside of you maybe putting up some pictures of athlete's plate? That's an opportunity for education. And this one is something I really want to poke people with, and if this offends you, good. Are you choosing crowd pleasers for your menu or nutritionally adequate offerings for health training and recovery? And you know what I'm talking about. And I know once in a while, and we had this in the NFL, Fast Food Friday, of all the days of the week, I would love it not to be on Friday, but sometimes your coach wants to have kind of some fun foods on your menus. But what I've also seen is sometimes RDs get into this notion of like, well, they're going to love me if I do deep dish for post-game meal. They're going to love me. They're all going to be really happy about that. And if your team has no other recovery access except for nutrition, then you're part of the problem as far as I'm concerned, if you're going to offer deep dish as your post-game meal. There needs to be a thoughtfulness around, if I'm the only opportunity for recovery, is that the best option? Is that how I want to represent my department? Are there inefficiencies in spending? And we always see this. A lot of times they're making way too much food. Is there a way to kind of do some plate audits or meal audits or things with your cafeteria to figure out ways that you can reduce costs and that, make you look good actually to your organization? We've had a few changes just this past year with the Blackhawks, where we saved, over $150,000 just from making a few inefficiencies a little bit better. And that looks really good on you as a professional within the club. That enhances your respect and that kind of, part of that respect, knowledge, kind of impact piece. And then again, is your cafeteria, your feeding environment, an extension of the nutrition department? Does it really feel like, are you proud? Is that something you could stand by yourself and say, yeah, this is an extension of who I am? Because guess what? When things go wrong, where do the fingers go, right? And oftentimes they end up back on you. So make sure you're feeling comfortable about that. And I feel like it's an area to really kind of go deeper in as a practitioner. Clinical nutrition is another area of practice. And this is kind of a baseline of involvement, and you may not even be at this baseline, and that's okay. But as we get into clinical nutrition practices, obviously we're dealing with maybe individual counseling, individual interventions on food practices, allergies, intolerances, dealing with nutrition deficiencies, blood work review. Maybe we're dealing with gut issues or specific health management issues, injury and return to play protocols, illness interventions and return to play, because there's illness that creeps in, different types of illnesses. And then you might be dealing with disease states and related medical conditions. So you might be dealing with diabetic athletes, sickle cell, rhabdo, overtraining, Redis, kind of those, we'll call them disease states. I know that Redis isn't a disease state, but you know what I'm trying to say. So we can click ahead to the next slide. And again, this is an area too where, especially in the pro environment and sometimes in the collegiate environment, if you're kind of working a lot in that logistics role, a lot of dietitians report that they're just not kind of really getting integrated into these things. And they're trying to figure out a way to kind of get more respect, so to speak, to be kind of seen as more of a medical kind of clinical professional. And so, some of the questions and some of the critical thinking around here is like, okay, are you involved in the medical meetings that go on? Do you have access to the EMR? Do you have access to the daily injury report? And in addition to that, do you have the opportunity to contribute to these? If the answer is no, then that's a good place to start, because you want to try to get involved. You want to try to get to be in the know. Sometimes it just involves asking. Sometimes it involves some advocacy. And a way you can build that advocacy, and for me, it's getting involved in the athlete physicals. So most teams have an athlete physical as part of an intake that happens at the beginning of the season. Make nutrition a part of that. Make it a station that they have to come to. Make it a place where they have to complete an intake with you, and you get a profile on every single player. That helps to kind of elevate yourself within the medical group as like, oh, wait a minute. Oh yeah, maybe they should have a nutrition intake. You go back to your trainers and say, this athlete's reporting some medical issues, some dehydration history, some clinical things that I want to talk to you about. And that helps to kind of elevate you again within that practice area. The big question to ask is, who's the gatekeeper of this area? Are you in good professional standing with them? So oftentimes it might be a head athletic trainer or a doctor. How do they feel about you as nutrition? Do they see you as an extension of the strength department or just the cafeteria lady? How do they view you in your role? Because that's going to actually shape the way that you get into that type of practice, right? And that relationship and that kind of respect building, you have to get to the gatekeeper. That's going to be the person that allows you access. And then do you need to educate those said gatekeepers regarding your role of nutrition and MNT? And you probably do if you're not involved in them. So again, I find that getting involved in the athlete physicals and then kind of looping yourself into the conversations that happen medically, and then trying to say, well, it'd be helpful for me to get on the injury report. Sometimes that can be the way to get in, but this is kind of sometimes a dance depending on where you work in terms of access. And then the real big kicker here is, do you have the professional knowledge and confidence to deal with clinical cases? So you may want to get involved in REDS. You may want to get involved in gut issues or clinical issues, but you need to do your own gut check and ask yourself, am I clinically competent? Did I have a strong clinical kind of background in my internship or some good mentors? And if the answer is no, guess what? It's an opportunity for you to get training, in the areas and kind of get additional education in these areas as well. You can reach out to peers or mentors, or for example, our Elite Ops course, where you can kind of dive deeper into areas like hydration or biomarkers, or kind of get deeper knowledge into some areas where you might have kind of felt a little bit shaky at the beginning of your career. We can go.
We have one quick question. We're probably what I'd love to do, just so we can try to stay on time. Just Kelly, thanks so much for raising your hand. We'll just do all the questions at the end, if that's okay with everyone. So yeah, just type them in the chat or the Q&A, and then we'll hit them all at the end.
Great. This could be something we could chat for all week about. So I'm going to kind of finish up here with 2 more sections, and then we're going to hand it over to Scott. So performance nutrition scope of practice. So a baseline, sometimes it's a generalized approach. Everybody just kind of gets the same access to sport nutrition products at the fuel station for their performance nutrition. Maybe you're involved in mixing up sport drinks, walking around the practice sidelines or a game with gummies and a water bottle. I've done it. I've been there. That's me doing it. And then maybe you're kind of involved in giving athletes supplements or sport foods kind of before and after training. So again, it's kind of your performance nutrition, but it's kind of a little bit more centered around maybe logistics on the day-to-day operation. I keep watching your mouse, Dana. Boop. Go. Yeah. So this is an area that I think we can also, again, I'm kind of thinking more about these kind of big teams, big collegiate settings where we're kind of getting things done, but are we really trying to create individual athlete profiles to help specific interventions? And I think what's really valuable to know is that within your athlete population, you're going to have like a bell curve, right? You're going to probably have a 80% in the middle that kind of can get by with just the generalized stuff. But then you're going to have like a 10% at one end that really needs maybe some specific intervention, and then 10% at the other end that don't care and aren't going to do anything you tell them, even if they need it. So really trying to move towards the practitioner model of, am I really looking at this based on an individual need? Am I coming up with grams per kilo recommendations for carbohydrate and protein for my athletes, even within these big environments, getting them honed in on that? Looking at giving them individualized hydration and sweat recommendations. Hydration recommendations based on sweat and electrolyte losses. Are my recommendations centered around someone who's trying to do some weight management on the team? Are they periodized based on the phase of training that the athletes are in? And if you're helping give out ergogenic aids like caffeine or pre-workouts or alanine or creatine, are they being used appropriately with the right dosing, timing, and frequency? Okay, oftentimes you just see these things randomly in guys' lockers and you walk by and you go, okay, he's taking that. Does he know what he's taking? Does he know how to take it? Are you kind of getting individualized with that player about that product, you know? And then are you measuring your impact on performance, either subjectively or objectively? So oftentimes if you're in this world a lot, you know, am I actually having an impact? And that can be by directly asking your players through surveys, by maybe tracking a few case studies of players where you're seeing success and reporting that back to leadership. But being able to kind of measure your impact, especially if you're in team sports where that's kind of hard to do, that's really important, again, for that advocacy work you can do for yourself. And then another thing we kind of get involved in is education. That's part of our daily role. Again, I kind of chuckle these days when you're on Instagram because there's a lot of interesting education going on. A lot of people in banana costumes and bikinis doing a lot of random things on social medias. That might be part of your education strategies. You might be doing fact sheets, videos, manuals, formal lectures, pre-workout chats, having contests with your athletes. I've seen Jeopardy and kind of fun things like that. And so those are some really fun kind of baseline education activities if that's part of your scope of practice. And then expanding your scope in that area, we can click over. Getting deeper, if that's part of what you're doing, is saying, okay, can I measure a baseline knowledge, maybe with my rookies or maybe with my first year athletes, and be a way to measure and kind of track the impact of that education on their knowledge? Do you have a system for doing that? Do you actually have a program or a syllabus for your education program for the whole season that's kind of in line with either physiological needs or periodization strategies? The big question also is, are you using an education method that's most applicable to your population? Football athletes learn differently than hockey athletes. They learn differently and process information different than, let's say, a cyclist. So like really, really tailoring your education approach to your population is going to be critical. You can't use the same thing for everybody. Some athletes just don't read. They just will not read your fact sheets. As beautiful as they might be, you know, they're just going to use them as like just something to write a girl's number on. Okay. And then are you permitting your athletes to evaluate your education program? So are you asking them for feedback? Is this appropriate? Am I helping you in my chats, pre-workout chats? The big piece here is also, do you have an opportunity to educate your coaches and staff about what you're doing? Because that's also a key to advancing your practice. So I'm about to turn it over to Scott. This is an area of practice that Dana, myself, and Scott have all been involved in. What I want to say about it in terms of this area of practice is that the RDs can 100% lead, manage, and be a part of all of these activities. This world of sports science and applied physiology is open to us to be a part of it. What you need to be prepared to do is to learn and to develop skill set in it. And then to work yourself into being the lead in this. And I know Scott will probably talk a bit about his own personal experience. For me, that came from doing an exercise physiology master's and really getting into the lab. But what I will say is that we can be a part of all of these things. We can lead them, we can manage them, we can run them. It's just about us getting training and the confidence to do it. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Cool. Well, thanks, Jen. So Jen had asked me to speak on the area of director, vision, planning, and staff management. And so what that kind of made me think about was my journey, and leadership was kind of the starting piece of that. If you don't know my background, I started off at Michigan State University in kind of a consultant role in academics. First full-time in sports job was at Auburn University, and then I came here to the Cowboys. And yeah, I'll jump in the journey in a second, but I've said this before in other talks I've had. At least when I was going through school and stuff, there was nothing in the sense of leadership training. And so it's something that we at least had to then, and maybe still now have to seek out on our own. And it's, I think, the first place that you should expand your scope. Jen's given great examples of a number of different other areas, but especially if there's the desire to direct a department, to have scope of that, because we have assistant and associate athletic directors that are dietitians now. We have people that are doing lots of different directing, and you have to have a leadership skill in that. And so to be able to talk about, vision, mission, core values, things, there has to be some side of you on leadership that's grown from that. And it's just not something you have to wait for. You don't have to wait till you have a title to now really work towards that leadership. I think you lead up. When you are an intern in a role, you can have some leadership up the ladder. And so and there's a ton of different resources. So kind of with my journey, when I started off in a leadership role and I had graduate assistants and interns for the first time, I kind of went by the golden rule. I treated them like I wanted to be treated. And that meant with a whole lot of sarcasm, because that's how I grew up. Those were my locker room kind of opportunities or experiences, were with just filled with sarcasm. And so that's how I spoke to the people that worked for me. And it's not what they needed, right? And I had to learn what they needed to grow and develop and serve the program. And so had some real issues from that. And I got some grace from my administrators. They demanded that I grow in my ability to lead. And so for the first time, I turned to try and find some resources. I found a ton. I just listed a few down there. And I'm sure there's a whole lot more now. And you'll find every topic there. I've seen topics from leading from the bottom up. Like, there's so many different topics from leadership that you can read forever. I like Patrick Lencioni because he puts his sort of leadership into fables, and it's more of like a graphic, not a graphic novel, but like a novel type reading versus just bullet points of how to lead. And so that went from treating others like I wanted to be treated to now thinking about others higher than myself. I'm taking one piece of scripture and using another now in the way that I started going about my leadership. But it's something I felt like, again, you have to lead yourself before you can lead others. And so early failures, I think, led to some real successes. I think, especially the last few years, you could probably talk to some of the GAs I had at Auburn, and we are still very close, and we still have some mentoring calls, 9 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And so I think it shifted for me. And so it's something that we all have to take steps towards. And so there's tons of resources out there. And so that's the first kind of step, I think, that in a desire to become a director, you really have to nail down some leadership skill sets. You can go to the next slide for me, Dana. And so when it comes to kind of creating core values, mission, vision, again, something I hadn't, because I had no leadership sort of training, I didn't know what that even meant. Even as I try to develop the leadership side, it really didn't come into this. And so I had kind of created a motto just from, I think, passions that I had. I always loved a serving kind of nature through different avenues of church and other aspects. And so that was always something. And that's a core thing of what dietitians do, is we're service oriented. And so there was that. And now, again, Jen kind of got to it with the sort of sports science applied physiology side of things. There's always problems that we're having to try and solve. And so that's what sports science is. It's finding these different problems or these relationships you want to see, you want to kind of find a relationship to different things. And so solving is it. So I had this motto: I want to serve and I want to solve. And from there is where I developed other aspects of core values and mission vision. Brad Lomenick, I was able to serve on the board of CPSDA for a few years, and Brad came and helped us do some core value, mission, vision sort of casting early in our stint. And he has a nice book out there too on leadership. And so again, early stages of where I started working on this. And then really what helped me finalize kind of a vision, a mission, really honing in on core values was the CPSDA, now the ASPDA organization, their Elevate Toolkit. If you haven't seen it, it's on their website. It's a great resource. It has a number of different modules you can go through. And it's something I just really encourage that you invest in your team as well as yourself by doing something like that. Yeah, and I'm sure there's a number of other good resources out there. It's obviously geared towards dietitians and that sort of thing. So that would be my plug for them on that. All right, and you can kind of jump to that career planning. So I think when it comes to planning, we might have desires. I know a lot of people have made a jump quickly to a director role, and I spoke about this last year at the collegiate football kind of pre-symposium. I wanted to be a director very early in my career as well, just by the title. I had colleagues and peers that had these director titles, and I wanted the title, but I wasn't professionally ready for it. And so you can have plans. Everybody asks, what's your 5-year plan? And I think that's fine. I think you should have a plan because it helps you sort of know different things you need to be preparing for. But I also say hold on to it loosely. I did grad school at University of Kentucky that Jen mentioned at this top. And after living in Lexington, I went to Michigan State, and I never wanted to live south of Lexington, Kentucky. And since 2009, I've lived south of Lexington, Kentucky. And so I had a plan to live north, and that plan got squashed pretty quickly. And so I think you can have a plan, but I think you want to equip your plan is maybe a better way of thinking, because I guess I don't know Dana as well, but I know Jen probably didn't have the plan of being in the nutrition, now I'm gonna blank, I'm busting you guys' program name. I'm so sorry. Performance Nutrition Pros. PNPs, I'm so sorry. But that wasn't a plan of theirs probably, but they were equipped to be able to do that, is kind of what I'm getting at. To lead the seminars that they lead in the webinar like this, to mentor, to serve, to still be the nutrition professional for professional organizations and such. They've equipped themselves from that. They didn't necessarily have it down on paper that was the plan. So that's why I say equip a plan versus having a plan. And again, just even if you don't have everything laid out, you don't have all of the mission, vision, core values, you might know where your skill set, a gifting is for you and what you're passionate about. As I mentioned with that serve and solve, it was just something that kind of came out of me just because it was something I felt a passion towards. And so you can work towards that and move towards that. But once you are able to really work out those core values, just again, it's having it down in front of you and revisiting it regularly to help you know what that true north is for you, where you're kind of what you want to hold on to, so it doesn't become just appealing to the players, appealing to the coaches, that you can hold true to what you have to do with that. I do have there to make shakes even as Michelangelo painted. So that reference is a MLK reference. So it goes, if a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets even as Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and on earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well. And I say that to say, it goes back to the respect that Jen mentioned early. We have to be respected. So if your current responsibility is to make shakes, do it great. Everything about it should be excellent. And that is what people are going to remember you by, how well you do something, even if it is small. So if you're sweeping streets, if you're doing it well, they're going to remember you for how well you do something. And that is what helps you have these different career paths. And again, it's what opens up doors. And so I say that to just say there can be some fatigue in doing those things, but generally there's an end to that season, and there will be new seasons that come. And because you're not going to stop learning, I have this shirt down here because the great philosopher Joel Totoro once said, you can't spell nerd without RD, right? And so dietitians are nerds. We just we feed off the research and the methods. And as Jen was talking about, with just understanding why you are doing a certain supplement for a certain dose and things of that nature. Like we dove into that side. And so we still want to keep learning on the nutrition. That should never stop, as we are in a nutrition professional field. But what are the other aspects? Like, where is that interest lying that Jen mentioned in other areas? And it can be in other stuff, food service nature, but it could be more into body composition. It could be more into a biomechanic type of thing, or GPS, or whatever it could be. And so becoming more learned in those areas through textbooks, through webinars. I mean, YouTube's got a wealth of resources out there. So that aspect of it can, again, be that next step in there. And I say that, let your competence catch up to your character. So again, it's going back to how well are you working towards things? How much are you trying to be a professional in the place that you're at right now, and having a character that's marked by just who you are as a professional, and then you will develop those other aspects of it. There's a jump, like I said earlier, there's this desire to jump to a director role, but you have to lay such a groundwork down. And so the last thing I'll say is, like, your first impression lasts a lifetime, whether it's a first impression as an intern somewhere, or when you have that first job in the head athletic trainer, or the head doc, or the strength coach, or the position coach, whatever it is, has that impression of you. That lasts, and that can help you tremendously, or it can hurt you tremendously. And so make sure that first impression is there, and it's going to be marked by your character. It doesn't mean you're trying to BS your way through everything about nitrates, because it can get confusing, and you might get called out pretty easily. But just having that character to say, I don't know, let me find out for sure, and I'll come back to you, and you do that, and that holds a whole lot of weight with those guys. So again, that's what I wanted to kind of go through a little bit with kind of the career planning and vision casting. But it's a lot of self-leadership that I think is an important aspect of all of that.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Scott. I think your sort of core values actually kind of seamlessly transition to the last sort of section of this web workshop. We are probably going to run a few minutes over, so I won't take any offense if you guys need to drop off. We will record it so you can catch the rest. But I was an Outward Bound instructor way back in my early years. I was on track to be a mountain guide, and that's what I wanted to do. I had nothing to do with nutrition. Didn't want to go to university. Didn't like school. I didn't like academia. But Outward Bound motto has always stuck with me, and that's to serve, to strive, and not to yield. And that I think just a lot of the principles that I gained from other aspects of my life, and that's what I kind of encourage younger RDs too, is sometimes we get stuck with like our skill sets in the RD space, but in the leadership space and the critical thinking skills that we require to expand our scope of practice, you can pull from a lot of other aspects of your life, and they really do transfer into your development as you expand your scope. But eventually I got sick of climbing rocks, and I went to university, and then I stayed there for a really long time. Really long time, probably 14 years, I don't know. But a lot of the time I was, while I was doing research through my PhD, as well as postdoc research, I was still working in practice. So I was able to sort of manipulate things the way I wanted it, to have this position, part-time, and then fluctuate my research commitments. So I was always able to kind of shape things to fit with the way I wanted to kind of craft my career. And that's one thing I always encourage people to do, is sometimes you'll get a job description, or a research position, or a project, and you'll be like, oh, I want to do that, but it has these restrictions or these barriers. And I challenge people to think outside the box. I was able to work for the Canadian Sport Institute while I was living in California. And that, I just thought outside the box, and I came with a solution that solved their problems, or solved some of the problems that they needed for staffing and for certain teams. So I think definitely, try to be an outside of the box thinker. And then one thing I've come to realize with just going through the research path, and then also always having one foot in research and one foot in practice, was also there's this sort of triad of performance nutrition that I think really helps everybody elevate. I think sometimes I've also been in the rep role, and you know, sometimes we get reps calling and trying to, you know, gotta get on a call and follow up and checking how you like their product. And that, you know, that gets annoying sometimes. And I hated that role, by the way, but it gave me a lot of respect for that role. And then it also enabled me to form some really cool advisory roles where I was able to pull on my research and practice experience and really help some, you know, companies and R&D departments kind of, you know, really create a product that actually helped practitioners, helped us actually implement and execute innovative strategies. Because it's great to have this research with whatever supplement, and it's great to want to see a place in your team or your sports where it might have an impact. But if you don't have that product available, you don't have a performance solution. So I definitely like gained a lot of respect for sort of what I see as this triad of performance nutrition. But similar to, like, you know, kind of Jen's path as well, and you know what she's described in the food service space. When I worked for the Canadian Sport Institute, there was like a big gap in like really having an impact. Like we were kind of like, you know, 0.2 FTE with this team and 3 hours with this team and a presentation with this team. And I really didn't, after a while, I was like, well, we're not really having an impact. Like, so I developed a program, I kind of thought outside the box again of how do I have an impact with Swimming Canada? And, you know, developed a program, wrote a proposal for sort of a more full-time role, traveling with the team and really, really taking control of all the food logistics and the culinary aspect of things for training camps. And that was actually a really huge shift for integration of performance nutritionists or RDs in Canadian sport. And since then, as Jen mentioned, there's been, you know, other programs that have expanded in the Canadian sports system. But one piece that always came back to us as practitioners, and we were always asked to do when it came down to like budgets and salary and, you know, navigating resources, was quantifying our value, or being able to, you know, really describe, quantify, or qualify our impact on medals, on gold medals. And there were these different organizations that, you know, tried to do that and were responsible for, you know, what we got paid, how much we were able to work with different teams. And it was a really cool sort of exercise over and over again to be able to quantify and measure our impact, and then be able to communicate that. You will always get the, we don't have enough budget, or there's no budget for that. You will always get that. And I encourage practitioners to, yeah, respect that, but be solution oriented, think outside the box for ways to still work within budgets, or challenge the budget by coming with a solution and a value proposition. But, you know, through our, as Jen mentioned, our long career, we've seen some really big changes in what we do as practitioners, and, you know, the top leading sort of strategies in, you know, carbohydrate metabolism, caffeine timing and dosing, and sublingual caffeine, et cetera. But so as I kind of, you know, have gone through the career, I'm like, what is, you know, what do all these big changes, or these big, like, oh, we have something new in our space and we get to try it out, what do they all have in common? They all have in common like a comprehensive understanding of physiology or nutritional physiology. And they all really underpin, got that for you, Jen, they underpin the performance determinants of sport, and they all are done with research. And I got to a point where I was like, am I really having an impact? Like, I'm doing all, you know, these strategies that I'm reading in textbooks and reading papers. But when it comes to an athlete who's at the top level, and it's the difference between, you know, a few milliseconds or a tiny little bit of force, are my nutrition strategies able to basically help an athlete win that gold medal? Or are they kind of status quo and everyone's doing that same thing? And you read about like the EIS, you know, kind of having some background innovation around the nitrate space, probably maybe 3 Olympic cycles ago. So really trying to make sure that what I was bringing to the table within performance teams or sports medicine teams was innovative, but I did not have the physiology knowledge to be really innovative, like to really, really impact at that level where you're affecting gold medal performances. So I ended up kind of, you know, spinning it away and be like, hey, I can go in all these different directions. There's all these areas you can go into sports psychology. And I often say that I think dietitians or nutritionists within a sports science team actually have the hardest role, because we need to have expertise in so many different areas, from physiology to psychology to tech to food service to like a lot of the emotional intelligence and soft skills. We need to understand the high performance directors structure. We need to understand the game. We need to understand the coach. We need to understand environmental physiology. Like, I really think that we have the most challenging role. And I think the future of performance nutrition in, some top level sports will be several dietitians, where one maybe is expertise in the culinary piece. You have a dietitian with an expertise in environmental physiology, an expertise in body composition manipulation, depending on, what the priorities are with that sport. So I ended up, flying across the world to this place called Tasmania, which is actually a part of Australia, not Africa. And in conjunction with the Canadian Sport Institute, did my PhD research there. And I won't go into what that was, Jen mentioned kind of, but I really found a sweet spot with research and practice. So as I mentioned, I kind of always worked in practice, whether it was consulting, or when I came back to North America, I was working in the MBA part-time, and then in Keith Barr's lab part-time. And the research I was working on was able to really allow me to kind of earn and gain a seat at the performance table with all the other practitioners that we worked with. So some of the skills that I, gained, and you guys can just read this, but, some of the skills that you gain through PhD work they're just so relatable to, really taking up more of a leadership and a kind of like elite role within the nutrition space in any performance team. And I was able to expand my scope of practice with like advanced knowledge base, critical appraisal skills. You could really be confident when you have, strength and conditioning coach or an AT come to you with like, a new thing they heard on a podcast about some supplement, or they bring a paper to you, and you're able to really break it down and explain, why there's errors in these methods, or why within your priorities of more evidence-based strategies, why this specific fancy supplement maybe isn't the best time for that right now for this athlete. So yeah, you guys can read all these, but I'll give you a couple of examples of, just how working in cycling. So I worked in Europe, then flew back and forth in cycling for several years. And it was definitely a little earlier on where not all teams had full-time nutritionists. Now teams have 2 and 3 nutritionists and interns and really comprehensive apps. And we're really able to, periodize to the gram everything that riders put in their mouth. Sometimes I think it's overkill. But in my PhD research, I was running metabolic testing and had to understand a lot about GI physiology and training program design and training adaptations. And that really allowed me in the space of cycling to really, really dig deep with nutrition strategies, because I understood all of the physiological components of a cyclist and of a team. And I also raced bikes for a while, so I understood the world of cycling, the crazy world of cycling. And sometimes when you're working with a team, in this particular team, there's over 100 staff. Some of these staff had spent their lifetime in cycling, and you're working with over, I think there was like maybe 30 different nationalities as well. So you're really navigating a crazy environment where there's a lot of old school kind of beliefs and systems, and you really have to have that sort of the science and the physiology expertise to come into a new team and get that respect and buy-in and support, and be able to navigate where you're going to prioritize your role, and where you're going to kind of sit back and let things kind of roll old school way for a little bit. And then also, of course, cycling, you're always looking for the next best thing and really innovative strategies. And I think once you get into the research world, the academic world, and you're, presenting at a few conferences, you become networked. It takes work for sure, but you're networked with some of the leading researchers. So what's coming down the pipes with research, what people are working on. So in that role and having that network in academia, you're able to kind of bring that to your role working with athletes, where you're able to really be at the leading edge and be confident that you kind of know what's coming down the pipes before it's even published. So you can, obviously with ethical strategies in mind, you're not going to rip people's research off, but, you know, letting that research, talking to that researcher and, you know, explaining your scenario with an athlete and, you know, bringing some of that really new research that's unpublished to your team. And that's what the leading edge best teams in the world in cycling anyways do and are doing. In the NBA, a little bit of a different world. And my postdoc work was in nutrition strategies, specifically collagen and MSM, to improve connective tissue synthesis, reduce injury risk, and, you know, sort of optimize the return to performance, and also try to improve like training adaptations for, you know, your really explosive power-based force type training programs. So in that space, you know, I had to understand and learn all the molecular pieces. The first time I sat in a lab meeting, I actually cried when I left because I didn't understand a single word they were saying. They were talking in molecules. It was pure alphabet soup, and I was like, I am not smart enough to be here. And eventually, I figured stuff out. Siri, what's a PPAR? But eventually, I figured things out, and, you know, spent a lot of time trying to figure out you know, what people's different research was. So I was responsible for basically scaling up this molecular work to humans. So I was able to really design nutrition interventions with the training. So I had to understand the training. I had to understand ForceDex and that data and analysis, statistics, and then understand all the nutrition pieces with dosing and running, you know, all of the wet lab ELISAs, et cetera. And there's a lot of problem solving involved in research, especially if you're tasked with basically scaling up lab-based wet bench stuff to humans. So a lot of problem solving skills and basically kind of building the physiology testing department of a more wet lab, molecular lab environment. So, but with doing that part-time and then also working in the NBA, I was really able to bring the knowledge around injury and nutrition around injury, but then having to run this type of research, I was able to understand what the doctors were trying to do. I was able to understand what the physiotherapists' goals were. I was able to understand what strength and conditioning's goals were through, you know, a return to performance plan. So my nutrition strategies, I was really able to take sort of innovation from the lab and really layer those into each phase of a return to play, and then also bring the value of novel nutrition strategies to reduce injury risk. In the NBA, injury, and, you know, a lot of pro sport, injury is huge, and that is a huge loss of money. So it's like all hands on deck when you have an injured athlete. And if you can bring value by reducing injury risk, that's a huge win for expanding your scope of practice and getting a seat at the head of the multidisciplinary performance team. And that's where, you know, and that's part of, you know, why Jen and I have built Performance Nutrition Professionals is, you know, we really do believe that nutrition should be at the center of that performance model or that performance table, and have, you know, an equitable, you know, presence, voice. But in a lot of scenarios, we are not equipped yet, or we don't have the right training to earn that. And I believe we have to earn it. So that's why we've, you know, developed and built the Elite Ops course, is to give those skills. So I am going to turn it over to Jen, but I had to throw in this last slide here just because Jen hates this slide, and I love it because it shows all the places where nutrition affects performance, directly affects performance, and the most important performance determinants of sport. So I'm going to close off there with my little triad of performance nutrition world, and then Jen is gonna switch it over here. I'm just going to switch the screen and share something else here. And I'll just go to the end here. All right. All right, Jen, close us off. There we go. All right, Jen, you good to go there? You're just muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Awesome. So basically what we tried to do today is condense like like I said, 60 years of nutrition practice and insights and critical thinking into one almost hour. Um, what we also wanted to try to do is just to stimulate some thinking and some questions, and Dana, I'll get you to kind of lead the questions in the Q&A. Just a second. But what we were really trying to do is just get you to realize that that if you're just at the beginning of your career, or if you're kind of stuck within a skill set, that there's opportunities to grow and advance. And what's fun about our profession is it can be this like lifelong journey of exploration and different roles and different titles, and it's just something where you can kind of keep being excited about what you do every day. We also want to just tell you a little bit about us towards the end of this. There's our social media information, Performance Nutrition Pros, our website. Quite a few know already about our Elite Operator course. We're offering 2 to 4 a year. Our next one is in June in Colorado Springs. We're over 50% registered now. So, and we have a cap of 50 people. So if you're interested, we have a few more registrations spots available, but I'd urge you to kind of get on that sooner than later, because we usually sell out. And yeah, and that's kind of the end of what we wanted to share today. If you guys have ideas for webinars as well, let us know. Part of the idea of this webinar has come through just conversing with our network and our people that we kind of help to mentor and shape every day. So I'll kind of flip it over to you, Dana. I'm going to flip onto onto my mobile. So you guys can maybe start off with the first question, and I'll throw in an answer, and then I'll flip to my mobile.
Perfect. Okay, so a great examples of athlete competition or fun educational events with limited tools. We only have a kitchenette. They'd asked for cooking demos, but we haven't had the space to do so. So maybe Jen, over to you, like just ideas on how to run sort of an education with education opportunities with a kitchenette.
Yeah, so I remember actually traveling to Switzerland to work with our snowboard team that was kind of living on the road for 6 months, and the guys had like variable, options for cooking, and a lot of athletes may even live in environments where they don't. And so we kind of did a hybrid grocery store meal prep and meal kind of development tour, where we actually went to the grocery store, and our tour was also aimed around grabbing the ingredients we were going to be cooking. So there was like a tie-in. It wasn't just like, oh, here's shop around the edges. We actually had a list and kind of made it fun. Like they had to go out and find the items. And as we had educational pieces built in for every item. But then we came back and we made them. And it was just like, all we kind of needed was a heating element or a microwave. Everything was kind of meant to be like, you have a limited amount of opportunity to do this. And every recipe was kind of developed around you're cooking in basically a hotel. So you can get creative with things like oatmeal and hot pots, and there's a lot of options now for instant kind of rice packets, and, traveling all over the world, you get really creative with those things too. Even sometimes really good tasting Mountain House MREs may be something that athletes have in their backpacks. Mountain House is the best brand. Scott, we can debate about that. But
I didn't eat a bunch of them with my son. It's all right.
Mountain House is the best one. I'm sorry. I've tried them all, I feel like.
The mac and cheese is trash, but I've had
the lasagna is good. But so I think you can absolutely do it on any budget, but that's what we did. We kind of we centered the cooking around that kind of the limitations.
Yeah.
One thing I'll throw out there real quick is we're going to be doing a demo with our rookies as they come in tomorrow. We won't be doing this demo with them tomorrow, but they come in tomorrow, and during their kind of rookie development program, one of the days will be a cooking demonstration, and our director of player development asked specifically, can I do it around air fryers? Because a lot of the guys, can grab an air fryer, have an apartment, and do something simple like that. They have more than a kitchenette, but if you can have a small appliance like that in a kitchenette, you can get a lot done with the air fryer. And so just like showing that to them, showing just the wealth of breadth of different things that you can do with something that simple.
You can hard boil eggs in a tea kettle. You can use an iron to toast bread. So yeah, and Sports Dietitians Australia has some cool resources as well for like hotel cooking. And so just like, yes, not necessarily seeing the kitchenette as a limit, but what can you do outside of that kitchenette? I've run nutrition sessions in classrooms with no cooking stuff and bringing in a hot plate and stuff. So there's definitely, yeah, just kind of thinking outside the box. I'm going to jump to this question here. Can each of you share one nutrition or applied physiology recommendation you presented to leadership that was then incorporated to be utilized in the organization's athlete plan of care? Scott, do you want to go first, and then I can jump on?
Sure, I saw that one. I just trying to think. First thing that came to mind is it doesn't cover the entire, all of the athletes plan of care, but I partner with Gatorade Sports Science Institute. They have a lab across the street. That's something I guess I could have expanded more on in my role here. Just I get to dabble in sports science right now, and one of those things is how I work with GSSI. And we do some biomarker testing with a dozen-ish players, and salivary biomarker testing specifically, and do that weekly throughout the regular season and get at immune function and kind of markers of recovery, and then make more individualized recommendations on nutrition and recovery modalities around that to help them with those markers kind of moving forward, to try and again help optimize that immune function and maintenance of recovery through that long season. And so that was something I talked to GSSI about, presented that to my leadership, and they let me take a stab at it. And so outside of, we've done it starting my second year, so missed a year, maybe two because of COVID. I can't remember now, but we were 6-7 years in now.
Awesome. Yeah, similarly, kind of bringing to the table, with kind of summarizing the research around biomarker monitoring for specific athletes, sort of, and then also body composition standards of practice. In a couple of the NBA teams I've worked with, that was a little bit antiquated and kind of directed by athletic therapy and maybe sports med, or a little bit of both. So I was able to really summarize and in a quick way, not like, run a 4-hour seminar, but summarize best practice, current state of knowledge, what we're doing, and then one of the things they care about is, athlete health and like athletes recovery, and if they're on the court or not, and reducing risk of injury. So if we can, not necessarily say this is best practice, we should be doing this, but really bring it back to how this impacts what the decision makers care about. So they care about their players being on the court and winning games and being at their best for as many games as they can throughout the season. So with body composition, they were, kind of randomly doing, skin folds. So we eventually have evolved to doing, a very strategized, a series of like skin fold analysis in conjunction with DEXAs. And that also gives us information about, limb discrepancies, and, looking at, get a little more detail around bone health. So if you can show how your ideas or your leadership in certain areas translates to what the decision makers care about, then I think you'll definitely be able to have an impact on how the team works moving forward. I'm going to maybe do one more. And I'm going to go with just like, so about the Ironman question and getting more experience in endurance sport. I would honestly, for our elite ops course, our first module does a pretty deep dive into a lot of the key sort of metabolic fueling pieces around endurance sports. So that would be a place where I would say you would get like the knowledge piece to really work in that space. And then there are tons of endurance athletes looking for support. And then there's a question here from Daniela, considering opening an internship position for international applicants. So what we're doing, and even if it's online, so one thing that Jen and I are trying to really do with at least a section of the education and the courses we offer is face-to-face. So I will answer the internship position question, but I think there's so much learning online now. And when I look at the best learning I've done, and the most impactful learning, it has not been online. It's been working with people face-to-face, and the value of having like 2.5 days with a small group of people, deep diving, the networking and the level of like knowledge, but not just like textbook knowledge, just knowledge of how to actually do your job really well. It's unparalleled. Like that's where the best learning has happened. And as you know, through my career, I've watched like more and more of this learning go online, which is great. It's great for access, but I think there's still a component that needs to have that sort of in-person piece. And for an internship, we are working on a mentorship program that will be a virtual type program for the most part. So yes, definitely open to international. I've worked all over the world, and one of the biggest sort of value added that I can bring is really that international insight. So I'm really eager to sort of work internationally a little bit more with practitioners and sort of bring them more of an international network to US practitioners. All right. I am going to wrap it up there. I'm very sorry we ran over, but that's just the way I roll. So I do apologize for running over, and thank you everyone who attended live, and especially, you know, were able to stay on extra. Feel free, you know, drop us a link, drop us an email or a text if you have questions or feedback about this. We'll make it live on the website